Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by veterans issues. So today we are going to do the question and answer episode. I have had a blast putting this thing together. Obviously, I've got more questions than I need, so I appreciate everybody's quick turnout for the question and answer episode. So, in saying that, I hope everybody's got a chance to check out vetwithamic.com. We launched it this week. It took kind of a whisper. I didn't push out much about it because I just wanted to kind of do a little field testing first, see how it interacted with just, I guess, the rest of the internet, so to speak. And I appreciate everybody who said, hey, man, I think it looks great. And of course, have checked out like all the cool features we have there. Of course, you can find all the content that we do here at Vet with a Mic on vetwithamic.com. You can also find our merch shop where you can get all the cool t-shirts and hoodies that we have available for all the supporters out there. So, in saying that, let's just get right into it. The Vet with a Mic Q&A episode. So, the first question comes from Colorado, and it says, isn't a therapist just a friend you pay? Well, I could see where people get that, but unfortunately, the therapeutic relationship is a little different than friendship. Well, and for a lot of practical reasons, whenever your buddy has a problem and they go to you to ask for your advice, you obviously have a vested interest in that person's life. So you want to see a particular outcome. Like, for just say, buddy comes to you with some marital issues, right? Well, you want to take up for your buddy. You want to be on their side. And so you want to take the side against the person's spouse. But as you might obviously suspect, that person will probably have some pretty complicated views about their spouse. And so if you're taking their side, you may inadvertently rub them the wrong way, right? Because they still love this person. They have complicated views about their spouse. And you may be doing the right thing as a friend, but you get invested in a particular outcome. Oh, yeah, man, I think you should leave her. Or, yeah, you should stay together, whatever it is. And it's really hard for you not to act a certain bias out in that relationship. But in a therapeutic relationship, it is completely one way. The person that you go to see for therapy, they don't have a vested interest in your outcome. They just want to help you make the right decision for you. They don't offer any guidance. It's not an advice thing. Therapy is not. So therapists will not tell you what they think you should do. They help you weigh out the options, whether it be, hey, should you stay for the kids? Should you leave? They'll help you go through all the avenues of different decision trees to come to the right conclusion for you. Now, like I said, they do not have a vested interest in the outcome. And so that really frees up the person who's receiving therapy to walk through potential scenarios, goodness, that they may not be able to do in their private life with their friends and family. This is a pretty common question, and it's usually brought up by somebody who has, I would say, been largely informed by media representations of what the mental health process looks like. Because on TV, the person tells you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But in the real therapeutic relationship, there is not a lot of that at all. Matter of fact, even the majority of the conversation is just the client speaking to the therapist. There isn't a lot of back and forth in some approaches. So I think largely this comes from what we see in movies and TVs about the way the therapeutic process works. I appreciate this person for bringing up this particular element, because it really is something that I think a lot of us walk around with, thinking that we understand what the process is going to be like. And then whenever we get to therapy, we go, oh man, that was not at all what I thought it was going to be. Or if you walk into a therapeutic session with that in mind, you may be a little off guard that it comes across maybe a little bit more distant than you thought it would be. So, yeah, let's move on to the next question. So, what is the difference between a counselor and a therapist? Also, a great question. So, the word counselor is a pretty ambiguous term. We've heard, you know, career counselors or even financial counselors. So that word is not one that we consider to be protected. So anyone can counsel somebody, right? Doesn't mean that they're trained to a legal standard or licensed through the state. So the word counselor itself can be interchangeable for a whole host of different types of jobs. For our ends, a counselor is someone who is, let's just say, a licensed professional counselor is someone who has been trained to the master's level, often, sometimes a little higher than that, but most of the time we're talking about master's level training. Excuse me. And these people, their primary function is to deliver services that are surrounding talk therapy, right? So this is the type of professional that you may go to when you're going to have a particular, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or another approach that just relies a lot on communicating with a therapist or a counselor in this case. So therapy is yet again one of those poorly defined terms within our society. A therapist can be can describe many different domains within mental health, right? So you've probably seen things like LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist. So all of these types of professionals all have specific training that deal with services to the consumer. So when you look at, say, you're going on psychology today and you're trying to find somewhere to go for therapy, understanding the different approaches that each person may use can help you be a more informed consumer when you show up to do your sessions. Understanding the difference between an LMFT and an LPC may be pretty marginal. I mean, there can be very little difference between the two, and they can provide a lot of the same services. Obviously, if we're talking about licensed marriage and family therapist, you can look at a few different approaches. Now, if you're just trying to find something for you, that's called individual therapy, right? But if you're trying to take your spouse, that's couples therapy. If you're looking for a group to participate in, then that's group therapy, right? And understanding exactly what type of therapist you're talking to or communicating with, making an appointment with, will actually do a lot of good for you in framing what your expectations are for that therapist. Now, we can talk about the differences between individual therapy and couples counseling and group therapy if we'd like, but just understanding that the word counselor and therapist is kind of just a generic catch all for a lot of different types of mental health providers that can be trained in a lot of different approaches. Now, as we talked about in the therapy issues episode, psychiatrists are a little different, right? So they are medical doctors who go to med school, And then they receive additional training with medicines that treat mental health therapy or mental health problems. Now, every once in a while, I'd say relatively frequently, you'll have psychiatrists who also engage in talk therapy, but most of the time, they're the ones who are going to be managing your medications that you're taking that are designed for your mental health problems. So, psychiatry is one type of mental health professional in which somebody may say, my counselor or my therapist. So, then there's psychologists. Now, psychologists are PhD or doctorate of psychology trained professionals, meaning they have a doctor moniker title that is applied to them. And these type of people are going to do a lot of taskings within talk therapy, right? Now, they may also do things like testing and diagnostic work like that, because obviously testing needs to be done, and particular states may require different licensing levels to do those functions. But a lot of the times, whenever you're going to a psychologist, you're going to be receiving talk therapy. Now, when you see a PsyD versus a PhD, not that it really matters in the big picture of things, but a PsyD is often trained as a practitioner, meaning the majority of their training is designed in providing services for the consumer. A PhD, however, may have more research background than practitioner background. They're both trained to be practitioners, so don't mistake that. But a PsyD may just have more, let's just say, reps with working with clients than a PhD would. Um, but both of them are trained to the standard at the state level, and of course by the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. Now, also we have things like clinical social workers or masters of social workers. So you'll see LCSW or MSWs. Now, those type of providers, they offer talk therapy as well, but they may just do it from a different approach. They may look at it as more system wide. They are often facilitators. They want to help you in multiple domains, not just within talk therapy. And I'm generalizing. I am not a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm not an expert in what they do exactly, but I do know that they render talk therapy services just like the other two disciplines that we've just talked about. And of course, we talked about licensed marriage therapists, LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists, and they do very similar work to the rest of the disciplines. It's just you can get there in a lot of different ways. It's one of the things that I love about mental health is there is not a single pathway to get treatment or to be treated. Yeah. So pretty good question. All right. So the next question is, can my job fire me for going to therapy? Well, I'm not an attorney, first of all. So I say that to say this. Um, it really just depends. It really depends. I would not say that they can fire you for going to therapy, but let's just say you're working at a job and you have an anger outburst on the job. And your employer says you have to go to anger management therapy, right? So when you go to anger management therapy, um, you are not technically the client. I mean, you are the client, you're the one that's receiving the services. But when your employer tells you to go to treatment, often they are the client. So anything that you say to your mental health therapist there in that capacity could end up getting back to your employer. So, in saying that, it really just depends. Now, this is a question that I hear a lot from people who work in law enforcement. If you're going to seek therapy by yourself, it's not your employer is not ordering it. There's no potential entanglement of who is the the client and who isn't, excuse me, then no, your mental health therapist or your mental health provider um, acts within the constraints of confidentiality. So, as we kind of talked about in the mental health episode or the therapy issues episode, confidentiality is the term that we apply to the protected um, relationship that is the mental health space. All right. Think similar to like an attorney, right? So, the things in which you say to your attorney cannot necessarily be used against you, right? They are protected under privileged communication, right? So your attorney may not be able to be, yet again, I'm not an attorney, but your mental health provider cannot be compelled to testify, right? Now, if you voluntarily waive your confidentiality, then yes, that can be, things can be talked about. You know, if you're going to therapy and you give somebody you live with, like a spouse, you've signed a release that your therapist can talk to your spouse about what's going on. Well, then you're setting a very specific adjustment to your confidentiality. So, to go back to your question, it really depends on when you go to therapy, who's the client? If your therapist or if the therapist says that you are the client and everything that you say stays here, with the exception of a few caveats, caveats being you can't say anything that makes the person believe that you are going to hurt somebody else or that you're going to hurt yourself or that somebody's in danger, like a child, for example. They are mandatory reporters. So if they believe that child abuse is happening, they have to report that. All right. So outside of those brief little caveats in which state guidance may vary from place to place, then no. What you say there will stay with that relationship. But as I said earlier, if you're being told to go to therapy because of, you know, some anger issue that you've had at work, and your employer technically is the one who is sending you to those services, then you, everything you say to that provider may get back to your company. So it's really important during the informed consent to pay attention to exactly what are the parameters of your confidentiality. All right. So there may be certain limitations that the mental health provider may be able to offer you, even if you are referred by an employer. But it's really important to know exactly what that informed consent document says. So ask questions about that. But to generally speak, no, there are no reprisals, um, with the exception of, I mean, I can't speak for every type of job. I am not an attorney. So I would say that if somebody has, or if you're in danger of losing your job by speaking to a mental health therapist, that doesn't seem complete to me. Seems like there should be more information. So I would say I would speak to an attorney myself, wherever you are in the United States, and see exactly why you were thinking that. Um, because on whole, if you're talking to a mental health therapist, no, it is confidential, and you have privileged communication rights to that mental health provider. So moving on. What makes a good therapist? Wow. Well, that really depends. I know these are some pretty generic answers here, but that really depends. A good therapist is someone who makes you feel as if they got your back and you're being heard, and that's really the basis of it, is a certain trust that you have has been cultivated between the two people. It's a relationship, though. Okay, just like anything else, there are personality differences that can undermine that therapeutic alliance. Some people you just don't like. So, and that's going to be different for everybody. But I would say, if you go to a therapist and you're like, I don't like this guy, or I don't like this lady, it's not that big of a deal. Um, Continue to work the process until you find somebody that you kind of connect with, because personality differences are going to happen. Sometimes you may have caught that person on a bad day, or maybe you're having a bad day, and that may shift the relationship a little. But I would say, on whole, a good therapist is somebody that makes you feel like you're in a comfortable position to talk about some really uncomfortable things. So whatever that looks like to the person, that's going to change. I know for me and my own, as a professional, and then as somebody who has received services on both sides of the couch, so to speak, um, just someone who lets me feel heard, and that they're paying attention to what I'm doing or what I'm saying. Some people are like, man, I don't know, this guy was sitting there taking notes the entire time. Well, some people might find that threatening. I kind of, I don't, maybe I'm weird, but I have the opposite approach. I think that the person's paying attention enough to be accurate to what I'm saying, so they're taking down notes. Often, if you're worried about what the person is writing down, they'll often show them to you, about what exactly they just wrote down. And most of the time, it is just for record keeping and making sure that they're collecting the correct information from you. Because a lot of the times people have, a lot of clients, especially if you go into like a community health center. They may have a lot of clients that they're juggling right now, and so there's a practical reason to write stuff down in the session, you know. But like I said, that the good therapist question is really relative. It's subjective to each person. And I would just say, just because you don't have a good vibe with the first one doesn't mean stop. Don't go, well, I tried, and that's it. Because, like I said, there's a whole host of different reasons why a person may or may not get along with you, or you may or may not feel, that kind of connection with them. But that's okay too. Just keep going. Doesn't mean you're a bad client, or that the onus is on you. Just try somebody else. Trust me, I've been there. But I would say that, on whole, though, um, a good therapist is hard to find generally, just because relationships are hard to find. So if you've came across somebody that you really feel good about, stick with them, man. Stick with them, because they're going to be able to help you. You've got that good, solid connection with them. They'll be able to provide you the services you need. Ooh, okay, this one's tough. So, how does PTSD impact sex? Well, I guess that really depends on a couple of different factors, physiologically or psychologically. So, physiologically, I am not a doctor, so I won't try to speak to that. Psychologically, PTSD can have a few, well, and I'm just saying, the person is asking about PTSD specifically, but there's a kind of a lot that can go into this: depression, anxiety. There's a few different disorders who may be able to, let's just say, negatively impact intimacy. All right. So, in saying that, how one feels about themselves has a lot to do with how one may engage in sex, right? Because if you're not really feeling that great about yourself, it's going to be hard um, to really feel connected to other people, right? Specifically intimacy, right? Because if you're just sitting there thinking about, how is this person in love with me? I'm such a loser. or whatever else, all the thoughts that can be going on to your head, say if you were depressed or if you had social anxiety or PTSD, it's going to be really hard to not have that impact you in the mood, right? Because one, well, that's a lot to be walking. Well, it's a lot to have like kind of moving around in your head while you're trying to be present in the moment with a partner. So I would say um, that it can impact sex to a great extent. Um, I would say that if you're having problems with sexual function, that you should seek a doctor. You know, I know that a lot of people feel a sense of relief with using medications to help with erectile dysfunction. If you're a female, then you may want to go into some pretty intensive talk therapy and figure out why these particular psychological issues may be impacting your sexual health. But either way, the point here is you're going to have to seek out some professional guidance. And not having sex with your partner, if you have one, is it's kind of a big deal for relationships. And if you're not able to connect with your partner, it's going to cause friction in the long run. So I would say if something in your life is impacting your sex life, that's okay. These things are momentary things a lot of the times, but seeking out, whether it's, like I said, using erectile dysfunction drugs to just kind of help get over the psychological tension, because look, as a man, whenever you're starting to have sexual function issues, it's something that snowballs on you. So the first reason you may not have been able to, let's just say, achieve an erection, that may have been something that's just totally momentary, right? Just a total transient issue. Maybe you had a tough day at work that day. Well, then whenever if you're not able to perform, anxiety starts building up around that, right? And it can take you to some pretty dark places if you let it. And so I would say that if a person is having problems with sexual function, there is either a physiological or a psychological root behind it. Either way, you have options, but chiefly, you're going to have to go talk to. I would do both. Talk to your medical doctor first, or whenever, and bring it up with your provider, your mental health provider, if you have one. If you don't, that's okay too. Just schedule out an appointment with a mental health provider and talk about it. There's really I know that these, especially guys, can feel a little nervous about talking about these things, but these things are remarkably common, especially the older one gets. It's remarkably common. And I would say that I have a little theory on this too. So chronic stress can do some really nasty things to your hormone system, right? Your endocrine system. So a lot of veterans may disproportionately have sexual health problems due to the endocrine system being taxed a lot during life in the uniform. And of course, lifestyle things like alcohol and cigarettes or tobacco use can also negatively impact your sexual health. And both of those things are pretty common within the military experience, the uniform experience. Drinking too much and using tobacco is pretty common, especially in the enlisted ranks. So I would say talking to a doctor and a mental health provider about your sexual health, there's no reason to stress or fret about. having that conversation. I know that it can be a little threatening, but as soon as you get those issues sorted out with a professional, the quicker you can get back to intimacy with your partner. All right. So this one is about VA claims. I wish we had Corbett here. Corbett would definitely be able to answer this really quickly. How do I start a claim at the VA? Well, I assume this is a disability claim. So the first thing I would say to do, because obviously different geographical locations are going to have different barriers to get this thing done, but the good place to start would be just with online. Go to eBenefits and set up your eBenefits account, and then I would say apply to get a veteran service rep. Now, that's somebody who can act on your behalf. That's their job. That's what they do all day. And they're going to know all the ins and outs of the claims process. So it really takes a lot of the effort off of you, a lot of the burden off of you. And it's kind of one of those things that just having somebody there in the room with you, or just that you can email questions about particular issues, really takes the stress off of it for you. I know that whenever I did mine, I probably emailed my guy 10 times over the course of the process. And I would say to say that if you haven't started a disability claim, I would also ask you, are you a patient with the VA healthcare system? Because if you're not, you may be doing yourself a disservice, because the benefit side and the care side have a lot of coordination between the two. And so if you're seeing a VA healthcare provider, they're going to have your records, and all the times you've had service at the VA. And I will just say this, I don't know how long you've been out, but if you have been out less than a year past your last day in the uniform, everything that you go see the VA for can be retroactively applied as service connected, which is a really cool change that is relatively new. And if there are those out there who may be in the case, and that might be the case for them, and you did not know about it at the time, I would then see if there's anything that can be retroactively applied if you saw any care up to a year after your last day in the uniform, because that may provide some opportunities for you that you're unaware that exist for you. All right. So it's a great question. I appreciate that. Oh, all right. So what is VOC Rehab? Well, all right. So VOC Rehab is another, well, I mean, if in this capacity, it's the only one I can really speak to, honestly. VOC Rehab is another chapter within your GI Bill, right? So they provide training that allows you to switch into a different job, right? So let's say, all right, so I was an MA, right? So that's military police work, okay? And say an MA has a PTSD diagnosis. Well, since they have PTSD, working in law enforcement may be a little bit more challenging to maintain that career. So say the veteran says, I want to work in a different job because I can't do this job because I have PTSD, right? Which happens, some people still work in jobs that may be a more problematic for PTSD. But let's just say that that's what you want to do, and you don't have any of the post 9/11 left, right? So you use VOC Rehab to maybe put you through school or through a different kind of professional training to switch careers. So it's another way for veterans to use their time, the resources that are available to them through the VA to get a new job after the uniform. So I've used VOC Rehab myself. I would strongly encourage anybody to take advantage of that program if you are eligible. Now, with that, though, you kind of have to have a diagnosis and a rating, in this case for a PTSD, but you would need a rating for VOC rehab and you would need a diagnosis for that. Now, in saying that, all those people out there who are in school or they're in the college right now, I just want to say there are disability centers, and I know we hate that word disability because it may make us feel some kind of way, but there are accommodations that can be made for you in the classroom that you may not be aware of. And I know that we're a proud people and we may not want to, well, take advantage of those accommodations, but these are federally protected. Okay. So let's just get back to the PTSD thing. Sometimes life is hard. We got a lot of different things that you're trying to manage. And, I had somebody explain this to me in this way, and I think it's a really great way of explaining it. So I'm going to use Archimedes here, my lovely owl sculpture here. So Archimedes here is like my trauma. So for the video's sake, I have Archimedes in my hand, and it's like a bowling ball. It's a heavy weight to carry around. Okay, so I can do a lot of things one handed. I can do most things one handed. I can go through the world not really noticing that my trauma is impacting me. But if I have to open a door and hold a cup of coffee while still holding on to my trauma in my hand, that's the time in which you may realize that there's a limitation you have. So, accommodations in college or at the university are just those flexible um, resources that you can utilize if you need them. Like, for example, a lot of times they may give you a late turn in day. Say you got a lot going on, especially, how things can be around anniversaries of things that happen. Say that week has just got you slammed because you were not as productive that week because this was the week of a particular anniversary for you from your uniform. And that made you fall behind in your schoolwork. Well, flexible turn in dates give you an extra day or two to help manage that trauma. Okay. So I would say if you're out there and you're using your GI benefits and you have a rating, or if you don't have a rating, please go get one because there are things that can make your life exponentially easier just by using the accommodations and the resources that you have available to you. And just so you know, somebody may be thinking, "Well, yeah, I'd do that," but not say that that the professors would honor that. Well, it's a federal law, so they have to. And if they try to deny you an accommodation, you need to route that up through your disability center because that's technically a big deal. And they need to have a pretty strong justification that they can articulate to their bosses that that's the reason why they're not making that accommodation. And trust me, they don't want to do that. So hold their feet to the fire. Don't let your trauma or your um, how you feel about yourself undermine the resources that are there available to you. All right. So, how do you go to grad school? Here's another university question. Okay. So, every program is going to be a little different. All right. So, in saying that, I can just tell you what my experience was. All right. So, when you go to apply to a graduate school, there's a couple of different things you really need to be paying attention to. The first thing I would say is, are they a reputable institution? Now, just because they have a .edu doesn't necessarily mean that they're a reputable institution. Excuse me. There are a few let's just say, red flags out there that you should probably attend to. Okay. You need to look at what their accreditation is. So, especially because you're talking about graduate school, that's a big commitment. And the last thing you want to do is, let's say you're going to a law school and you go to some program that offers a law school and you get accepted into, and then you find out that only like 10% of all the graduates from that law school pass the bar licensing exam. That's a problem, right? That's kind of a that's a predatory school, because you don't want to spend all of this time and money and effort into a school that may not offer you some career coming out the end of it, especially a license. If you need a license to do something, like, for example, in psychology, you have to have been accredited by the American Psychological Association if you're going to be a doctoral student, for example. So if you're applying to a school that doesn't have APA accreditation, you may be thinking, what's the big deal? No worries, right? But here's the reason why it can come back and bite you in the ass. Sometimes states will go, if you went to a school that doesn't have an accreditation or isn't approved by a particular governing body of the professional standards, they may require you to do more to get a license, because you have to prove basically that you have been trained to the level of competency for the state standard. Whereas if you go to an APA accredited program, then the APA is basically informing the state, hey, yeah, they're good to go. So they've been trained in our standard, to our standard. So I would say, if I'm looking at grad schools, the first thing I would do is see how whatever your particular discipline's governing body is, whatever your professional standards and ethics boards are, I would look at the school and see what they have to say about them. Because a lot of the times there are these, there's a kind of a gatekeeper function that professional identities have over schools. So they want to make sure that whatever school they give their seal of approval to are out there training competent people within the discipline. And that can just be generally any program, right? So that would be one of the things that I would do. Now, after I have narrowed down a list of schools that I was going to go to, or I was going to apply to, because that's the hardest part, is we're not even accepted yet. We're just applying them to, right? Then I would start thinking about two things. So a lot of the schools require you to take some kind of examination for admittance, just like the ACT for your bachelor's. For your master's or your PhD, they're going to require you to take some kind of admittance exam too. So sometimes it's the GRE, sometimes it's GMAT, whatever it is. I would put at least a solid 3 months into preparing for those tests. And there are all kinds of test preps out there. I don't necessarily endorse one or the other, but just give yourself about 3 months to prepare, so that you'll feel at least reasonably okay with taking that particular exam. Now, another thing you're going to have to do is cultivate relationships for letters of recommendation. All right. So you most likely will need at least 3 professors in your life that you can ask for a letter of reference, which is can be difficult for people, especially if you've taken majority online courses, which I think veterans are prone to do. But I would reach out to a couple of professors that you did well in their class and ask them if they feel comfortable in writing a letter for you. Now, no, the majority of programs are going to require these to be that you don't know what the letter says. So be really selective over what professors you're asking to write you letters for, because you don't want to inadvertently ask the wrong professor and you're not going to know what they're going to say on your behalf. It could be this guy's awesome or it could be this guy sucks. You don't know. You would hope that they would just rather tell you, oh yeah, I'm not comfortable writing one for you. But like I said, I would ask people that I knew were a sure thing. Now, in saying that, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't at least partially prepare you for one thing. Grad school's hard. It gets easier, but it's hard. And that's the process. The first month, 2 months, first semester, first year, um, they're going to lay a lot on you to see how you adapt. And I know with law school, like year one is like the weed out year. So, whatever program you're looking at, just understand that they're going to lay a lot of expectations on you. And that's okay. That's what you're there for. So, a lot of reading, a lot of, well, sometimes assignments are a little bit more labor intensive than bachelor's were. I kind of say this, a good rule of thumb is this: full time at the graduate level is like 9 hours. Okay. So, if you break that down, that's 3 courses. So, using kind of the rule of three here, right? I would compare an entire semester worth of academic work for my undergraduate was like one course at the graduate level. So, you're taking three. So, from my experience, it was like 3 times the amount of work. Now, that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable and that you should still do it, because it is, especially if you want to challenge yourself and push yourself. And but the whole point is to see if you really want to be there. For a lot of programs, it is. That's the reason why they make you take the GRE as well, is because that exam is essentially designed to kind of take you to your limits, right? It's a hard exam, so it takes a few hours to complete, and there's going to be questions that you're going to go, I don't know what the hell this is. Just as an anecdote, I remember whenever I took my GRE, um, I got some experimental math or something, and I just felt like I was missing, like it was in another language. I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. It was really let's just say humbling, right? So those are some of the quick tips that I can say about grad school is do your research about where you want to go. Check out the school. You're offering a pretty big commitment into them as well as they are into you. So I would want to know everything that I could about a particular school, because like I said, it's a big investment and you don't want to be in a position where you're 2 semesters in, maybe 3 semesters in, and you're just like, I hate this. I don't like this. This is not what I thought it was going to be. It's not earth shattering to be in that position, trust me, but it is not one that makes you feel that comfortable about the way your life is going. And like, and I know that a lot of us are probably making these decisions in our late 20s or in our 30s. So we may have this tendency to say, I said this a lot. My wait and see time is over. It's time for me to get to it. But that doesn't mean that you should be hasty and not really plan out what your next couple of steps are going to be. So I understand that if you're feeling like you're in your 30s and you feel like you're playing catch up on degrees or whatever your next career or occupation is, that's okay, man. It really is. Um, Not everybody has everything figured out. I say this all the time. Life's paths in life are rarely a straight line. So there's lots of different types of classrooms. There's lots of different paths to be on, and they are rarely linear in function. All right, so here we go. Is it normal to not feel like my wife gets me? Is that normal? Well, I would say largely yes. I think all of us, no matter what our coupling, feel at times that maybe our partners don't get us. Now, veterans, we add in an extra level, okay? Because a lot of the times, unless you're married to another veteran, which doesn't seem to happen doesn't happen a lot. Um, Civilians may not really understand the life experiences that you've had. Now, in saying that, it is also on the veteran to communicate what they need from their partner, which is challenging. That's hard. It's really difficult, especially if you have any kind of trauma. If you have PTSD or depression, or you can, there's a tendency to get locked in these mind reading battles, right? Well, they should know that I needed this. They should know that this is the way I am. And whenever you do that, it it puts the onus all on the other person instead of you just going, "Hey, I'm having a tough day today. I don't think I can go to that barbecue." And then your partner may go, "Why?" Well, you know, let's use the anniversary thing again. Well, it's the month of November. I experienced a lot of loss in the month of November. And so it's just, it's taken from my resources right now. That is an absolutely fair boundary to set up with your partner. But getting mad at them because they asked you to explain something to them is not very useful for your relationship. I understand the tendency to get mad at them and maybe even get a little abrasive with them. I do. I really do. I understand that because it takes a lot of effort for us to explain something like that. And we may be totally trying to avoid the entire conversation in the first damn place. And so if you're going to have to willingly interact with your spouse or your partner about something, it can take a lot out of you. So I understand the tendency to withdraw from this conversation. The problem is that when you do that, you're setting up an expectation about the future that's not accurate. They can't read your mind. And sometimes people may not be thinking about those anniversaries that we keep. They may not remember them. Just because they are etched in stone in your mind doesn't mean your partner remembers them. They may be engulfed in their own things. So I would say when it comes to veterans, is it normal? All right. That word normal to me is a problem. Because what does the word normal mean? Is it expected? Probably. Probably expected. Does that mean that alleviates us from communicating what we need and being flexible with, let's just say, our expectations? No, it doesn't. We have to talk. And even when those conversations are difficult for us to have, to maintain our relationships with people in our lives, we have to express ourselves in ways that communicate our needs, wants, and expectations. You can't just throw up an unrealistic expectation and expect anybody to be able to meet it. And I think that's one of the things that we all struggle with is it's hard for us to speak about what we need. Maybe because in the military, we weren't allowed to. We weren't allowed to talk about things we needed or we wanted. And so we have kind of found ways to sever those parts of ourselves. But then at the same time, we get really upset whenever those things don't happen. So we have a mismatch of an expectation and reality. So I guess that would be the first thing I would say. Is it normal to feel like your wife doesn't get you? Probably. On average, I would say probably. Now, what do we go, where do we go from there? That would be the question. What do you do now that you feel some rift between you and your wife? Because there's only two things that you can really do. You can ignore the rupture, or you can address the rupture. If it is a rupture, it may just be you having a bad couple months. But if you are having a bad couple months, I would say it's time to talk to a professional. It's time to go talk to somebody, because you need to manage that now before it becomes a rupture. Because ruptures are going to happen in relationships. It's just whether or not both of you are willing to repair the rupture. Some ruptures are worse than others. But if you're feeling a disconnect between you and your spouse, it's time to address some things. Now, we talked a lot about this in the relationship issues. There's a few couple patterns that people do that lead to less than favorable outcomes in their relationships. Mind reading was one of them. When you believe your spouse has information or knowledge about you that's not realistic, or vice versa, you believe something about your spouse to the point where if any information to the contrary is offered up, you don't accept it. So, in saying that, realistically, mind reading is a type of thought pattern that undermines trust in relationships. Now, the second major thing, as we talked about in relationship issues, are it's this nasty little pattern called double binding. And which we didn't talk about this as much in detail, I guess, with the relationship issues, because there wasn't video. But essentially, this is the kind of approach that somebody who is double binding uses. Come here. So it's this go away closer. So I just did two things. I set up a physical signal that was, don't you come close to me. But yet I had a verbal request for you to come closer to me. And that's kind of what double binding is. It is two messages that are at odds with themselves. And so kind of applying that to, is it normal to feel like my wife doesn't get me, is what is your signal that you're putting out? Are you putting out signals that have opposite meanings? Because that's entirely possible. Why wouldn't it be? I mean, when a person engages in double binding, it's often reciprocal. So both partners are usually engaging in it, and it ends up being like stacking up ammo. One partner does it, which puts the partner in in an unwinnable situation. So if I ask you to come here while given a physical signal or a physical message, a nonverbal message that says, don't come here, don't come near me. Either if I can only comply with one of the requests. And so if the person complies with the request and they come closer, then the person can respond with, I don't want to have to ask you to come and give me physical affection. So then the person who responded to the request, they speak back, well, see, this is what happens whenever I try to hug you. Why do I even try? And you see that both sides of the equation have just stacked ammo for each other against each other. So that would be my question to you is, are you sure you're putting out a unified signal or unified message to your wife? Which is not impossible to think of, especially if you're having trouble. Clearly something's bothering you. You're asking me, is this normal? So something is entering into your awareness. So I would say if you're aware of it, you're probably responding to it. And that would be the thing in which I would really want to tear into. What is it that I'm doing to make me feel as if my spouse doesn't get me? And I would just ask them. Ask your wife directly, baby, do you feel like you understand me? Because I don't really feel like I'm being understood. Now, when you do something like that, it's really important to use I statements, not you statements. It's just a strategy to not come across as if you're attacking your partner. So I feel as if I'm not being understood versus you don't act like you understand me. So use I statements, not you statements when you communicate with people, because that's really important to keeping relationships going. I statements get people activated. Why wouldn't they? Also, I would refrain when communicating with a partner. I would refrain from saying anything that sets a fixed condition for them. We talked about this on the relationship issues episode, but saying to somebody, you're a liar, where do they go from that? That's a fixed character category in which they have. They're a liar. Does everybody lie? Absolutely. Everybody has been less than truthful about something. Does that mean we're all liars? Of course not. So when you say to anybody that you're in a relationship, friendship or otherwise, you're a liar, they can't escape that condemnation. So you can see that they're going to be a little reactive whenever you say that to them. You're a liar. Because you lied, you're a liar. That's not even close to the way things work. That's all or nothing. That's black and white. And as true as that may feel, if you turn that same tactic to yourself, you're willing to give yourself a little bit more slack. Just turn it on other people too. Cut them some slack too. They may not have told you the truth on everything, but that doesn't mean that their character is that they are a liar. Yeah. Look, relationships are hard, man. They are really challenging. They're difficult. And I can't really I don't know all the solutions. Anybody that tries to tell you that they do, boy, they're fooling themselves. Every relationship is different. I have had failures in my own personal life with relationships. So I can't give you a catch-all or whatnot that will just immediately make you feel better about whatever relationship woes you're having right now. But I can tell you that if there's anything that you can take accountability for, do it. But also know that no relationship is one-sided. You can't take all the credit, you can't take all the blame. And that's the way relationships work. So if your relationship isn't working, it's 50-50. Both of you are not doing something that is making sure that it is not working. So this is what I would say back to you. Does your wife feel understood by you? I'm willing to believe that if you're feeling that way about yourself, she very well may be feeling the same thing about you. And there's nothing wrong with that, man. Look, not every relationship is going to last. And that's okay too. I have talked about this several times at this point about me being a stoic and accepting the things that I can control and the things that I cannot. I'm still pretty bad at doing that often. I forget what I can control and what I can't. But I'm going to tell you something that helped me out whenever I was in a relationship rut. Okay. Within Buddhism, there's a few great truths. The first great truth is this: life is suffering. Because life is hard. We are constantly fighting against entropy. Entropy is the tendency to kind of fall in disarray, right? Chaos, if you will. So our entire existence is to fight against the march towards oblivion. That's hard. So all we can do is maintain homeostasis, our equilibrium, as much as we can, but we try to do things that are the easiest, the path of least resistance. Now, I say that to say this, okay? So if life is suffering, the second great truth is this: do nothing that adds to your suffering or to the suffering of others. Now, what adds to suffering? It's clinging. It's what the Buddhists call it, at least. It's attempting to change a condition of the universe. This is the condition of the universe, my friends. It's all temporary. Everything is. Pain, suffering, happiness, anger. It's all temporary. Relationships, ultimately, are temporary as well. Trying to hold on to a relationship that you don't feel fulfilled in, that can add to your own suffering and to the suffering of others. Now, I'm not telling you what to do, man. I don't know what your problem is. I don't know what your issue is. I have no context. I really don't. I appreciate the question, but that would be the only thing that I would say is, I guess I said a lot there. Wasn't a short answer. Well, I guess that should cover our first question and answer episode. I hope you guys found this useful and informative and even a little fun. Like I have said all week with the promos on this is educational in nature. This is not supposed to substitute for professional advice in any domain or capacity. All right. This is just a question and answer episode from audience to host and back. All right. So I don't, as I've already said, nobody's business got put out there. And this is not something that can be substituted as professional advice. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I know I actually had fun doing it. I didn't know how I was going to feel about just speaking for an hour into the mic by myself again, because I've done the topic episodes before, and ever since then I've been doing the interviews, which are conversational, and so I didn't know how I'd be able to do, carrying the weight all by myself. But no, it was actually a little fun. It's actually fun. I think we'll do some more of these. So next time, I hope you guys, maybe this will queue up some more questions for you and send them in to me. I'd love to answer them. I may just start doing a little, maybe a question or two each episode. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think this was fun, though. Hope you guys enjoy it. But as I always say at the end of every episode, however life finds you, hope life finds you well. Till next time.